Hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Great to be with you all today. My wife gets really nervous when they say he can take as long as he can, because when you live in different parts of the world, if I preach under an hour, I get people who are bothered at me. And I come to the States and if I preach over like 30 or 35, it's just one of those funny things. So no, don't you worry. We'll get you home by midnight. Kidding. So some of you have maybe seen this picture up. We've had it up for a while now. And probably most of you have no idea what this is. Now, if you do, serious kudos to you. I was in Rome visiting a few years back. I love history. I love church history. And I got to go to Rome, which was one of the coolest experiences. I'm also half Italian, so I just felt like I should never leave. And they're drinking a little coffee at the old men sitting around drinking espresso. And I'm like, man, this could be me. I could live here. This is awesome. But maybe the Lord will call me someday to Italy. That would be fantastic. No hidden desires of mine, of course. And I remember looking across from where we were standing, looking down to Rome, because we were on a little mountainside outside the city, looking down into the eternal city and whatnot. And then I remember looking at some of the other hills around. And one of them, there was this. A bit of ways away, and I look at it and I says, I think I know what that is. I look it up on my phone, thanks to GPS, and it was the place I was thinking of. This place is called Monte Cassino. No, it's not connected to Las Vegas. Has nothing to do with casinos, money laundering or betting, any of that stuff. This place here is one of the oldest, it's considered the first monastery ever built. Now, a lot of you would say, that's weird. Why would we be talking about a monastery? Well, they call it a monastery today, and then it later transformed into a school. That school, I believe, is still running today, and none of us could afford to send our kids there. This is like the top school in Italy, and it's 15 to 1600 years old. Let me tell you a little bit about Monte Cassino, though, its origins and what in the world it has to do with us this morning. Well, between the years 410 and then 455 and then 476 after Christ, so this is 1600 years ago, Rome was starting to fall apart. And the Roman Empire was starting to really be affected by the Goths and the Visigoths who were invading from the north. And eventually, in the year 476, we know that, well, you may not, but I'll tell you, Rome fell as an empire. And it was decimated by basically what they called barbarians. Now, the reason why they called them barbarians was, you might call it a little racist or whatever, but the purpose was that Rome was all about art and culture and organization and streets and soldiers and judicial systems. They weren't perfect, but they were, one of the best the world had ever known under the Pax Romana. And all of a sudden, the Goths and the Visigoths only cared about coming and destroying, raping, pillaging, and leaving, and then doing it all again whenever they felt like it. So basically, they didn't put any architecture. They didn't build any schools. They didn't maintain any rule of law. They didn't even care about putting a world ruler. They're like, fend for yourselves, and when we want to come, we're going to come and rob you. It sounds very exciting, doesn't it? No. This gave rise to what we know historically as the Dark Ages, because they forgot to pay the light bill, as you all know. No, I hope most of you got that joke. Obviously not. But what happened in the Dark Ages was that every place kind of had their own little king, their own little lord, their own little city walls. But a lot of the people, the majority of people probably lived in absolute anarchy. Devastating anarchy where you were just trying to make ends meet, find enough to eat, find enough to survive, try to not get raped or killed. And there was no judicial system. There were no lawyers. There was no court scene. You were absolutely desperately on your own. Horrible, horrible instance. And that's probably one of the greatest moments of what we call anarchy in world history. Now, in the middle of this, the Christian population was very strong, and it was, I would say, very attuned to scripture yet in this time. There was a lot of true Christians. The challenge was, though, what do we do in a moment of anarchy, in a moment of total desperation where, when you're going to go a couple generations more with anarchy, what are you going to have? You're going to have no literacy rate. You're going to have no one that cares about the Bible, no one that cares about God, and it's just going to be debauchery and violence altogether. How do we live in a world that's so dirty without getting ourselves dirty? And now they relate it all the way back to that verse where Jesus Christ said, he told us, you must be in the world, but not of the world. It is perhaps one of the most difficult verses in Scripture on a practical level. Just think about it. Jesus says, you must be in the world. You say, Jesus, but look at the place. It's falling apart and it's going to pot. And like, look at the society today in North America compared to 50 years ago. It is a very, very, very different place. And when we're talking about so many problems at a moral level, I mean, homosexuality is like a done deal now. Abortion's like a done deal. Now we're talking about transgender and pedophilia coming in. That's where it's coming next. If you don't believe me, just watch some news. This is what's happening. This is where it's going. And a lot of us as Christians, what we want to do is to go into our little bubble, into our little sheltered, safe place, and say, you know what? The world's going to hell in a handbasket. I want to get the popcorn out and study end times. And I love the end times, by the way. I studied a lot. But it can be our little excuse to say, yeah, it's all going to pot. Cool, I'm out of here. Jesus said, you must be in the world. That's scary. But not of the world. What does that fine line look like? How do we play that gray area to make sure that we are influencing the world for good, that Christ is honored and glorified in all moments, from the darkest? And you think today is dark, think about, the eras before us. There was much darker times, and Christ was still extolled. So be in the world, but not be stained by the world, to be a light in the darkness. So here's what they came up with. And I think there's a very brilliant idea. The Christians of the time said, if we stay in Rome, there's so much debauchery and violence and problems that we can't even raise our families well. So we're going to be a city on a hill. If someone lights what does Jesus say? Someone lights what's the word? Not a candle. It's a lamp. Thank you. Lights a lamp. You don't hide it under a bushel. You put it in a place where everybody can see it. So they said, we're going to build on top of a hill outside of Rome a walled city, in a sense. Now, it later became known as a monastery, but that's not its origins. It was a place where families moved into. There was no celibacy and all that junk. It was families who moved in. They had a church. They had a school. They had a garden and animals so they could trade and have their substance. And they also had a hospital. And the wall and the fact that they had a church was to say to the Goths and the Visigoths, say, look, respect that we are a religious community. Respect that we have walls. So they were not an easy target, so they actually became a safe place. And then they would open their doors to society. And they welcomed in people from the city of Rome, which was walking distance away, to come in and go to church, have their children educated, use the hospital, barter and trade. And then, for example, so what were they doing? They were protecting themselves from the debauchery of society, yet they were still directly influencing society. It was, in a sense, it was a very brilliant idea. Now, the Dark Ages lasted a lot longer than any of them wanted it to last, of course, for about 300 plus years. But eventually, we come to the Middle Ages, and all of a sudden you have these locations that start popping up like Monte Cassino all over Europe. What are you going to do with these structures, these cities, these churches, and all this stuff? So then we get to the concept of the monastery. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details, but they don't have a lot of good fame, especially modern, as we know all the crimes and all of the indecency and all the horrible things that happen behind the scenes. And I'm not going to get into all those details, but it became something it wasn't supposed to be. So it's also a lesson to us to say, and don't take this hard, but this is kind of the point. There's things that worked at one time that may not work anymore. Jesus Christ is the center of our message. He is the one we love, we adore, we worship. It's what the world needs. But we need to be attuned to say, how is the world reacting today to God's word? What way can we make them feel attracted to Christ, wooed to Jesus Christ? How can we be in the world but not be of the world in our generation? If we go back 50, 60 years in the United States, our churches were booming. Not just the Brethren, but every single church you can think of. Bible, they love the Bible, they love Jesus, and there's hundreds and thousands of churches across this country. You come today, and it's a very different realm. I was talking with a brother, a very well-known missionary out in Europe, and he is a missionary to the United Kingdom. Very ironic when you think about it, because some of the greatest missionaries of all time came from the UK to preach the gospel in America. That's where the Brethren were founded 200 years ago. And they came to America, for example, among many other denominations and churches, right? No, the Brethren aren't a denomination. Sorry, scratch that part. But you know what I mean. And all of a sudden, you see that they have died. He says it's just horrible. It's despicable. It's so lost. It's like an atheist world. And we need to come now and start all over again. And he said, United States has always been a few generations behind Europe in a bad way. It's coming here. Here's some statistics for you. There's about 3,000 assemblies across the United States, and I think that includes Canada. The average amount of members in an assembly is about 30. The average age of the goers to those churches is upwards of 70. Do the math. Guess how many missionaries there are around the world between MSC and CML? We're missionaries based in America, and a lot of people look at us kind of funny, and I says, yeah, we're missionary to white people. They don't get that at first. We're missionaries to Americans. I mean, not all Americans are white people. You guys get that, obviously. But you get what I'm trying to say here. There's 3,000 missionaries across the world. There's 3,000 assemblies. And you say, wait a minute. All of a sudden, we came from South America. We did youth conferences, elders conferences, 1,000 persons. I mean, just filled up places. And you come to America and it's changed. It's different. I've talked to missionaries who say, I don't want to go to my churches in the States because I feel so depressed. They'll tell you that. They won't tell you that. They'll tell me that. And I mean, I'm sorry to bring the bearer of bad news, but a lot of us look around and say, what's going to happen? Where are we going to go? Is there any more hope? Is there another chance? What are we supposed to do in these times? Statistically speaking, we don't know what God can do. We know that he can do anything he wants. We don't know what he's going to do. And I'd like to be part of something really special in this country, in the United States and Canada and whatnot, and see some revival. I know we all do. We long for that. But the other thing is, what if it doesn't go that way? What am I supposed to do in spite of it? How can I keep reaching out? How can I keep being a light for Jesus no matter what? And of all the things I could tell you, I think the biggest thing that I take away is, as Christians, we are not allowed to give up. We are not allowed to give up. We don't know what time and place God has put us in. And I'll just hearken real quickly to the story of Daniel. Daniel had no incentive to follow the law and God when he was in a foreign land at 13, 14 years old. And all the other young boys who had come had forgotten about God altogether. And he and his 3 friends were the only ones. And look what God did through them. There's a sense of perseverance to say, I want to be a Daniel in a dark time, in a difficult time, of saying the truth is worth standing for even if no one stands for it. But it also is a call to be wise, to say, how can we make sure we are reaching people today for Christ? Do you think people need Jesus today? And if you look around, it's worse than ever. You see suicide rates, you see depression, you see families are so broken, so many difficulties, so many challenges. And as Christians, we need to say, man, Lord, give me your heart. When I see all this corruption and all this sin and all this crime, my natural tendency is to go into my little bubble and, homeschool my kids. I was homeschooled, so that was a little bit of a joke. And just like go away from the world. There needs to be a balance. But where is that balance? Where is that line? Where is the line where we influence society for good without getting tainted with evil? Do you understand where I'm coming from? This is a big question. The next question is, how do we revive our churches for good? That's a question that is very, very difficult. And I'm not here to open all the answers, because if I had them, it'd be so easy. I don't have the answers, but I think that the first step is to ask the questions, the hard questions. And one thing I truly believe is that the gospel message does not ever change. And Jesus's methodology, it's something that works in all generations. So what I want to do with you all this morning is to look at a story of Jesus as to how he was able to make people believe in him, trust in him, and then later go on to die for him. And here's something we often forget. We talk about Jesus as some great superhero. He is all the words and all of the above, and the most transformative, important, beautiful, glorious person in all of history. Yet most people saw a 33-year-old carpenter's son from hillbilly Hicktown up north. That's the honest truth. The Pharisees looked down upon him because to be a Pharisee, you had to be 40 years plus and you had to be married. Jesus had none of the qualifications. He had no personal rabbi. He had no great education. He had no rich mom and dad. He didn't live in Jerusalem. He never wrote a book. He never filled up a stadium. He was a nobody, yet he changed the world. And by 33 years old, he had accomplished his goal after only 3 years and left and has become the centerpiece of civilization. How? What did he do? Well, I mean, obviously he had a lot of things going for him that we don't have, like he was God. Come on. But there is a blueprint there as well. I want to call what we're going to talk about this morning Monday's Gospel. Monday's Gospel is a very simple concept. It's the idea that we love the gospel, we preach the gospel, we talk about the gospel, usually on Sundays. What does the gospel look like in our life? 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Well, with the economy, you might be working Saturdays too here now, pretty soon in a double job, so more like a 9 to 11 double. I'm kidding. What does our gospel look like in our home, with our neighbors, at our workplace, at our places, if we study or whatever we do? Is the gospel something that is just from our lips outwards, or does it permeate who we are? And are we showing that to the world as lights unto the world? To be in the world, but not of the world. So that they say, what do you have that I don't? Who do you know that I don't know? I need this in my life. So there's so many more things we could talk about, but let's just talk about a couple more things before I jump in here. So one of the things that we did is when we came to the States a couple years ago, we asked the Lord, what did he want us to do? So we remain missionaries to Hispanics worldwide. We work with Hispanics a lot because we're both from that culture. I look white, but I'm Hispanic at heart. And so I really have a lot of heart for the Hispanic world, but I also feel a lot of need among the English churches for encouragement to say, don't give up. How do we work forward? How do we keep pressing on in spite of the challenge? If there was nothing to do, we could all just sit around and, be happy. But I actually like the fact that we have work to be done, that we can be part of something special, that God could use us in special ways. May we be willing. Now, one of the things we did when Genesis came to the States, her English was, okay, but we wanted it to be perfect, as good as possible. So she says, you know what, I really want to get a job. I want to get like a part-time job to help me with my English. And we used to own our own coffee shop as part of a ministry to reach people in Bolivia. It was a very easy way to connect with people. And we closed that down when we came to the States. And she said, I really love to work in that environment again. So she applies to Starbucks. And I look at her and says, you want to work at Starbucks? Like the most liberal place, period. And she's like, oh, I want to work. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I take her, she interviews. She's been there over a year now. She loves it. They love her, and they'll give her any time off. And anyways, they call her the pastor's wife. They don't know what to do with her. They don't know what to do with me. They're like, these Christian people, but we hate Christians, but we like you. It's kind of weird. But she comes in to the workplace, and she has tons of stories almost every single day of just crazy things. These kids are so broken, so messed up, such a disaster. And then they see us. I mean, I remember the time when you told them we were celebrating, I think, our 4th anniversary. They're like, you've been married 4 years? Unbelievable. And I'm like, guys, that's not abnormal. Well, I guess it is becoming so. How sad. How sad. And one day someone came by, and the tip jar that's outside of Starbucks, they dropped a whole bunch of tracts and they drove off. Now, this is the South we're living in South Carolina. People know church. There's a church on every block. Seattle is a coffee shop on every block. That's where we came from. That's where our Comenius assembly is from. In the South, it's a church every block. They literally have signs on a road as you drive down. It says church, not deer. It says church. Everywhere. There's churches everywhere. It's insane. And so they saw these tracts, and they've had so many bad experiences. Here's the statistics for you. The number one reason why people do not like church is because of Christian hypocrisy. Number one reason. And we can take that however we want to, and the Lord help us not to be one of that number. But that's the reason why they don't. They grab those tracts, and one of the kids was related to, like he knew our churches and everything, but he'd gone the other way totally. And he was the one who grabbed all those tracts and ripped them up while cursing, and all of them could hear each other. Because that's how the mic system works. They could all hear each other. You hear, welcome to Starbucks. Yeah, you don't hear the rest of the conversation. They were so angry. He says, he left us a bunch of tracts and no money. And he just ripped it up and trashed it. And Genesis was just quiet, The next time someone left a Bible, one of those little Gideon Bibles, right? Left it in the tip jar. And the same guy was there, and he was irate. What are they leaving as the Bible for? And he was wanting to rip it up. He was very angry with the church, very angry with God. Who knows why? And another group said, but it's a Bible. You can't just rip a Bible up. And there was this discussion. Genesis is just really quiet, listening in. And finally, they make the decision to come to Genesis and say, Genesis, we don't want this Bible, but we can't destroy it. Would you please take it and get it out of here? This is real. A lot of kids in the States, a lot of young people, they know about God, they know about Christ, but they have a lot of bad examples and a lot of stereotypes and a lot of bad things. And and we could go through all of that. How do we break through that? How do we get them to understand that I'm not a great example many times, but Jesus Christ can change your life, and he is worth it, and he is awesome, and he is real? How do we get that across to them? That is so incredibly difficult. So part of the idea of Monday's gospel is just that. How did Jesus do it? How did he build trust in a community like where he was, so people to take him seriously and so that he could go and transform their lives? We're going to look together at Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 29. I do have the text up here. If you're too lazy, I'm kidding. It's easy to read. I would do it too. If you want to read it up here, it's up here. But we're going to look at Matthew chapter 19, verse 29 to 31. It says, Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee. And he went up on a mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and put them at his feet. And he healed them, so that the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they glorified the God of Israel. Now, this isn't a new scene probably in what you read here, but I will point out a few different things. Many different times in Jesus's life, we see him looking for rest. Jesus was a workaholic, not because he wanted to be, because they forced him to. And because his heart was so big, he couldn't say no. It's an amazing quality, but it was draining on him. You see moments, for example, when one of his closest friends and his relative, John the Baptist, is killed. He just wants some time alone, and they come and they badger him. They don't give him time to rest. And he is working. This is one of those times, I think, why does he go up on a hillside away from the people? So that they give him a break. Like, buddy, I can schedule in on Monday, This wasn't a thing. He wasn't allowed to do that. He was always on. And guess who they bring all the way up this hill? The people who shouldn't be going up a hill. I mean, literally, the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they're so desperate for Jesus to heal them that they're taking this person up this hill. Look at the amount of faith and trust they had in Jesus, and the level of desperation of the people for healing. Jesus could say, you know what, guys, sorry, I'm scheduled, I'm booked, I'm busy, I'm going on my little vacation tour for the weekend. We'll see you guys on Monday. I'm going to be at this place at 9 a.m. He could have. He also never charged, which is amazing, isn't it? If you would charge just $1, well, not dollars, you know what I mean. None of that. Just the compassion in the heart. And it says he healed them. Now, we have many texts that tell us that Jesus Christ, when he saw the sick people, he healed them all. One of the questions here, what does this have to do with the gospel? Now, this is a really important question. There are churches out there who will tell you that the gospel is about healing people. The gospel is all about, the external side. Now, as Christians, we say, no, that's not the gospel. The gospel, we know it really clearly. I'm preaching to the choir that Jesus Christ loved us, came and died for us. Now, I'll ask you one thing, though. What was needed for the gospel to be accomplished? Jesus could have come down the day of the Sanhedrin and the trial. He could have been tried. He could have been crucified. He could have been in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights and rose again on Sunday and says, thank you, guys, we're out of here. Would the gospel have been accomplished? The death and resurrection. Anybody who believes in him has their sins forgiven. That was enough. The gospel was done. That was a weekend. It could have been a weekend trip. And he had to make it 33 years. The other question is, why did Jesus have 3 years of ministry and 30 years, what would seem like sitting around, doing nothing? A carpenter's son. Why didn't you move down at 30 if you're going to do the ministry side and then leave? Well, the gospel is the cross and the resurrection. That's the crux. But here's the thing. who would have believed in him? Who would have trusted in him? Who would have seen him and said, I want him to be my savior? So why did he suffer, the manger, the poverty, to Egypt, from Bethlehem to Nazareth, carpenter's son, losing his dad at a young age, having to go through poverty, having to put his family on his back so that everybody could look to him and say, he understands me. He understands suffering. He understands loss. He understands sacrifice. And then you see him go through his life 3 years, healing and feeding and doing so many amazing things and teaching. But what happened? His teaching backed up his actions. He wasn't one of those, slick, good speakers who just talked nice and then did nothing, which is what we call politicians. Sorry, but I mean, they're just people who look good on the camera and they say things like, oh, I'm going to feed the poor and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then, they're doing all kinds of other stuff. They don't really care about me or you, just as long as they get our vote. I don't want to get all political on you, but, we kind of understand how they play. Jesus didn't play those games. He lived what he preached. Part of the heart of Christ was, if I can do something about it, I will. He had the power from God to heal people. And when he saw them suffering and lame and blind, he says, I want to lift you up. I want to heal you. Here's the thing, though. Sometimes as good old brethren, with our we got our Bible, we know our stuff, and I'm a big proponent. I love the brethren history. But one of the things that we do is we get sometimes so entangled in the word and stuff, we forget that that we need to live out what we preach. That we might have all the knowledge, but the ugliest persons I have ever met are people who have a lot up here and the artery to the heart is blocked. The single ugliest people I've ever met, period. And I've seen a lot of them. It is extremely dangerous. We need to make sure that what we know, we are actually as brethren doubly or maybe triply responsible for living out, because we know, in a sense, more. We know what we're supposed to do now, and we're responsible to live that out. See, the gospel is not this health and wealth and healing. We know that. But here's another thing. Why did Jesus heal? Why would he bother? Why didn't he just go and preach the gospel? If the gospel was just the words that you say and the cross of Christ, and that's it, which is true, because that is the gospel, why would he heal? Now, again, we can go to town and attack the extremists and all the crazies and all the miracle workers. And I'm going to be really honest too. I don't think we should put God in a box. I think God can do what he wants when he wants. If I could go and have someone, just pray for someone, have them healed, or have someone else. I mean, God tells us, someone's sick, you go pray for them. But then God does the rest. I don't think we need to play those games, but I have a big problem with people saying, I'm a miracle worker. And then they go, I'm an apostle, and I do this. And I had a conversation with one of these guys once, very big time guy down in South America. And I told him, hey, if you're so-and-so and you do what you say you can do, why do you charge money when Jesus didn't charge anything? Why don't you go to the hospital and clean it out? Why are you filling a stadium and then healing a couple and leaving the rest of them saying, what about me? Because it's marketing, because it's fake. So that's really sad to me. But here's another question. Why did Jesus heal people who would get sick again? You know something about Jesus? Every single one of the persons that he healed died again. Every single one of them. I often think of the case of Lazarus when he's dead and Jesus comes by and he was a close friend. And why would Jesus weep? Like, Jesus, come on, man. Like, you're going to get him out. He's right there. It's all going to be fine. And you wonder, was it maybe just the very fact of, he's going to die again. And everybody heals is going to die again. And so many people are going to die without the truth and die forever. I don't know. That's not the theological answer, but it's one that reaches me. Another thing about Jesus, when he healed, who did he heal? He healed everyone. There's many passages that tell us that. Then why did he heal? See, he could have taken all the glory for himself, but who did Jesus point to in all of his life? Jesus, being God, we see Ephesians chapter 2, didn't esteem it as something that he was pursuing. His hands, his life, everything he did pointed to God, and they glorified the God of Israel, not Jesus. Is that shocking to you? Even him, who deserved the praise and honor, wanted God to be glorified above all things. That humble heart that he had, that must also be in us. So the gospel is not healing. We know this. But why did he heal? And I'm going to jump quickly to the next one here, but I really want to cement this point. Why did Jesus heal people who were going to die anyways? Because he was building trust. I don't know about you guys, but if you have a doctor that family doctor you've been to several times and he's helped you several times, what does that do? It builds trust. Thanks to COVID, it's kind of gone a little down. We're like, I'm not sure about the medical community anymore, but it gets a little bit dicier, But, you have a family doctor. You know this guy. You have this doctor. We have one of those in our town that, we trust. We know. We've gone to several times. He's helped us, And if he tells me, hey, buddy, look, here's the x-ray. You have cancer. Here's the amount of time that you have to live. Here's what we can do to try to change that and do chemo. You do it, right? You say, yeah, I trust this person. I trust his expertise. I know in the past he's not lied to me. Now, another thing is if I'm just walking down the street and some stranger comes up and says, hey, buddy, you're going to die in 3 months from cancer. You want some chemo? No, I'm not excited about that. I'm not going. It's Friday. Have you ever done chemo? I've never done chemo. Let's go do chemo. We don't do this. We're not insane. But you trust someone, then they give you bad news and you say, wow, I don't want to hear this, but I need to hear this. You know what that means? You don't understand what I'm talking about. We need to understand that the gospel is first bad news before it's good news. It's you're a sinner, you are condemned, you are not as good as you think. God is actually your enemy right now. And if you don't change this, you are on a railroad that has a precipice and it goes a lot deeper than the Grand Canyon. That's where you're headed. And I'm telling it because I love you. But if someone just came and told you that, you're like, what? You're a weirdo. You're a crazy guy. What are you talking about this thing? He was building trust. He said, you can trust me. You can believe me. I care about you. He healed their sick. Now you say, gee, I can't do that. I can't go and heal people. I mean, I wish I could, but that's not something I can do. What about the next one? It says, then Jesus called the disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now for 3 days and have had nothing to eat. And I love this word, I am unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said 7, and a few small fish. Now, there's a few things I find kind of intriguing here before we jump right into this. But on the disciples' side, they say, where are we going to get enough bread to feed all these people? It's a huge amount of people. 4,000 men, women and children might have exceeded 10, 12,000 people sitting there out to see Jesus. And they've been there 3 days with no food, and they were a long ways from a town. And they say, where are we going to get enough food? Well, a couple chapters before, they've fed not 4,000, but 5,000. The next chapter you read, they're on a boat, and they forgot the bread that was left over from an amazing miracle, and they just left it all, and then they're like, we don't have any food. And that can be really easy to laugh at them and says, man, you guys are a joke. I mean, God provides for you. You literally have Jesus there. How many times in your life have you prayed out to the Lord? Said, Lord, I need you to help me with this. I'm really desperate. Please answer my prayer. And then he does, and we're all celebrating and excited. We sometimes forget to say thank you. I think that sometimes happens to us. And then the next week, the next day, or, another massive problem comes. We're like, Lord, where are you? You forgot all about me. And God could look down at us like as if we're a little kid and says, really? Last week, like we just had this conversation. We just went through this and I was there for you and I provided for you and you didn't. Why are you doing this? So I think I like the disciples because they're a lot like me. They have such little faith and they're so dependent on the Lord and he's so patient with them. And then catch this little part. I don't know if it's on purpose, but it says, how much food do we have? There's 7 loaves. Well, it's been 3 days. The loaves are not like the Wonder Bread that you can keep for a month or 2 or who knows how long, But this is a couple days and it's gone stale. You can have the bread. Jesus is old, it's nasty, it's ugly. We don't want this bread. But then they say a few, not fish, just a few small fish. You can take my bread. Please don't take my fish. Don't touch this. I don't want to give this away. But of course, we see that they're not too eager to help, but they forgot who they're with. Now back to the important part. Jesus, it says, he has compassion on the crowd. He knows they've been with him 3 days and have had nothing to eat. He is unwilling to let them go away hungry. Now, here's the next question. Is the gospel social gospel? There's another type of gospel that's talked about, social gospel. You may have not heard about it, but it's this idea that ministries go and we're going to feed and we're going to help and we're going to have hospitals and we're going to have orphanages and we're going to do all these things that are ministries, but we're not actually going to preach the gospel at them because we find it offensive or problematic or who knows. So they're just saying, we're going to help people and they're going to see God's love and it's just going to fix everything. Is that the gospel? Is the gospel feeding people? I mean, we could just join, Salvation Army, modern Salvation Army, and just go and do these things and no gospel. But that's not what it's about. We know that the gospel is Jesus Christ, his sacrifice for us. So if you had a problem with, for example, healing the sick, yeah, of course, healing is a huge benefit and blessing to people's lives, people who are blind and crippled and all these things. That would be amazing. But what about feeding? I know some of you guys have kids or grandkids, You eat breakfast and it's 10 o'clock and they're hungry again. You eat at 10 and they're hungry at 12 and then it's 2 o'clock. Where's the food? I'm starving. Really? We just did this. We just had this conversation. We just fed you. You're going to do it again. And it's 12 at night. You're Mom, can I have a glass of milk and some cookies? Kid, go to bed. What is going on? Why would you feed people who are hungry again? It seems kind of funny, doesn't it? But see, Jesus needed to show them, I care about your big needs as well as your little needs. I care about you as a person. Here's a question. Would I be willing to be friends with someone if I knew beforehand they would never come to Jesus? Would you still go into that relationship? That's hard to answer, isn't it? And the other thing is sometimes we like to have people that only agree with us. And I know that the media, I know that the news, and I know that a lot of politics wants to divide this country, divide us on political, racial, and all these other ways to divide us. And who is supposed to bridge those gaps? Who's going to cross enemy lines? Now, if I tell what I'm going to say next in the South, everybody gets it, because to them, politics is very intertwined with Christianity in a very bad way. But I tell them, we're supposed to have Democrat friends. And I know some when you're in Arizona, you're wait a minute, but I understand that. But here's a question. Are we only making friends within our little paradigm of what we're a Republican or we're a Democrat or we're this or we're that or we agree? Are we able to have friendships with people who don't agree with us? Are we able to have conversations and have empathy and have compassion and build that bridge? Because we know that the culture, we know that the media, we know that politics is not building bridges. Yet Jesus amazingly had friends with the Pharisees and with the tax collectors and with the sinners and with the Samaritans and with the Gentiles. All of these people who were so divided, and he reached all of them because all of them were his creation. They were people. Doesn't matter your color of your skin, how old you are, or what worldview you have. We all need Jesus. How do we get that across to people? How do we build those bridges? Now, at the very tail end here, I'm going to propose to you that this is actually the gospel. Now, Jesus doesn't preach anything. It's a very fascinating passage because the feeding of the 4,000 is not a passage where Jesus is openly talking to the people. I am absolutely certain that over the 3 days, he had a lot of things to tell them. But for whatever reason, the author of Matthew decides to just talk about what happened, not about what was said. And they bring me to an interesting question. If people could only see us and not hear us, would they still see Jesus? That's a tough question right there. Are we showing what we're preaching? This is a visual representation of the gospel. The gospel is Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for us and his love for us. Now, in the Bible, in Jesus' own words, he talks about himself being the bread of life. He takes bread and breaks the bread at the Last Supper and says, "This is my body. Take this in remembrance of me." So the bread and the wine were symbols of what he had done for them. So in a very real way, when he takes this bread and he breaks it, you can't help but say, this wasn't a mistake. Maybe there's a correlation here. So let me walk you through this, and if you don't agree, that's fine, but I think that this is pretty clear to me. When it comes to the gospel, what's my job? What can I do to be saved? sit down. You have nothing to do here. You can't get saved. You can't earn your place. You can't give me money. You can't bribe the judge. You get to sit down, and that's the end of the story. It must be done for us. For by grace you've been saved, not of works, that no man should boast. So that's the first part. He told everybody, sit down. Were the disciples going to provide food for 10,000 people? No, only Jesus could. So then it goes on and it says, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, that could be a reference to Jesus Christ being something worth giving thanks for, someone that was perfect, someone that was before God acceptable. He was human like us, yet he was absolutely God as well, so that he might, in a very real way, take the hand of God, the hand of man, and reconcile us together. He was, well, there's so many things we could say about that. And then he broke them. That talks about the death of Jesus Christ. Now, if you think about this miracle of breaking 7 loaves and feeding 10,000 people, that's an amazing miracle. But what does Hebrews tell us? That one man died once for all time, that all who believe should be saved. So one body broken, one perfect sacrifice was enough, not that 10,000 people from 7, but 1 to millions from the first day, even from the first day of creation. In a very real way, who put their faith in a forgiving God, all the way to the very last man and woman to ever live. Jesus Christ is enough for them if they should believe. Isn't that amazing? That is a miracle right there. That is the single biggest miracle and the biggest gift in the world. Now, here's the next part, is he gave it to the disciples. The gospel was given to them to give to the world. Go and make disciples, and then them gave it to others, it came to us, and we have the same job of giving it on. Now, here's the one thing. Why did Jesus send the disciples? The disciples were not the cream of the crop or the best prepared to do something like this, right? I often wonder, why didn't Jesus leave us a few angels? For some music, some conferences, some special meetings. Wouldn't that be great? You wouldn't have to listen to me drone on or, great music and everything. But come on, if the angel was present, we would all be sitting down very quickly and enjoying the show. You know what I mean? But you're stuck with me. You're stuck with us. But there it is. And they gave them to the crowds. We're supposed to go, and we're taking the name of Jesus. We're the ambassadors of the Lord Jesus Christ. And people look at it and says, oh, if Christians look like you, I don't want to be a Christian. Oops. See, that's where it gets difficult. We are those ambassadors, and I don't know about you. I don't always do a very good job. And look at this. And all ate and were satisfied. I love the fact that when you know Jesus Christ, it's like being in love. It's hard to tell someone what it's like to know Jesus Christ. It's kind of like giving somebody a glass of Coke who's never had Coke in their life. And they're like, what is this black water with bubbles in it? What, are you trying to kill me? Is this motor oil? I mean, it's crazy. Like Coca-Cola is the weirdest thing to ingest into your body. Or like that Mountain Dew that's like green. You're like, whoa, that came from somewhere in Ukraine. I'm not sure I want to drink that. Some of you guys got that joke. Some of you guys didn't. That's okay. You say, taste it, and you're going to see it's awesome. Right? Knowing Jesus is like being in love. When you know it, you know it. When you are, you are. And when you have Jesus, it says, taste and see that he is good. He satisfies. Words are not enough. How do we get that across to someone else? We need to say it, but we really need to also show it, that Jesus is enough. And then it says that they brought up 7 baskets full of pieces that were left over. I could talk about that for a long time, but I'm going to skip that right there. And then this might seem insignificant, but it says men besides women and children. See, in the old world, women and children did not matter. Neither did the elderly. To Jesus, they did. They were all people. They were all valuable. They were all special. We see a story of Jesus crossing the Sea of Galilee, and he didn't get a good reception. Because what he had gone to do was to heal a man who was demon-possessed, which everybody saw as the crazy guy who cuts himself open and lays around naked among the gravestones. I mean, who wants to see this guy? Yet Jesus didn't see the crazy demon-possessed man. He saw a soul. And then he restored him to his sane self. He saw what we don't see. And then Jesus, and that's part of the next story, goes on to actually do that. So here's a question as we finish today. Does our gospel work on Mondays? Does the things we preach about and talk about and love and Jesus Christ and all this thing, does it pour out of who we are? In our society, a lot of people have preconceived ideas about Jesus, about Christians, about this. How do we break through that? That is a really difficult question. How do we make Jesus relevant today? I'm going to be really honest with you. If we do what was used in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they used to have these tents, the gospel tents, and they would load up with people, and that was awesome. Can we do that today? I think I've seen it done. It's hard. People have changed. If you go door to door, I've done it. In South America, they open the door and they're like, hey, it's a white guy, come on in. Yeah, if you do that in the States, they're going to call the cops on you sometimes. They're like, oh, what's wrong with you? We moved to the South. Everyone in the South is so friendly. It took me a few months to meet a few of my neighbors. I went to one of them, we gave them Christmas cookies. And I walked to the door and I knocked on the door and they had the ring, and they got the ring on the door and they're like, who is it? I'm like, whoa, chill out, buddy. I'm literally your neighbor. I'm bringing you Christmas cookies. And the guy walks out, he's like, why are you bringing me Christmas cookies? Because we're your neighbors. My wife made these. She thought you might like him. He's like, okay. He walked, no name, no. I'm like, what is wrong with these people? He probably moved from New York. I don't know. Anyways, it's hard. I'm not trying to bash anything, but how do we get people to see Jesus without all the filters and stereotypes and problems? Do we got to join the chess club and the book club and the swim team? And, maybe, I don't know, people need some tax help. Can we teach them English? What's the way? I'm just spitballing here because I don't know your neighborhood. I don't know your life. I don't know where you live. I don't know what the answers are, but I do know that we are not allowed to give up. And we must maintain the same pure gospel, but think creatively out of the box at what resonates with people today. We both know people need Jesus worse than ever today. Our country is literally falling apart. And as Christians, we don't want to be part of that divide, but part of saying, hey, you might feel like you're drowning, but there's someone who can save you. There are answers to your questions. And how do we take away, that stereotype and bring people to see Jesus Christ? I've never met anybody who really, when they hear the story of Jesus Christ, can reject him. They'll reject us, they'll reject Christianity, they'll reject all kinds of different things. But Jesus, if we had a world full of people like him, we would have, everybody knows, a much better world. So, and we're supposed to be as him to our world. And the second question, very hard, but do we see brokenness in the world, sin, corruption, with contempt or compassion? This is hard because we want to go into our cave. We want to separate from the world. We want all that nasty, sinful, gross crap outside. Our nice little holy, correct lives inside. And yet Jesus breaks that apart, sitting with the tax collectors, with the prostitutes. Say, Jesus, you're not allowed to do that. You're like, oh, wait, actually, you can do whatever you want. Maybe I can learn something. How does this look like? How are we supposed to attract people to Jesus Christ today? And I present to you that one of the things I find most powerful in this passage is Jesus built bridges. He built trust. He had empathy. He had compassion. Sometimes we want someone to get saved in 5 seconds. There are people who have the gift of evangelism and they have a tremendous gift. But if a church has one of them, you are blessed. Most of us are like me. I'm not an evangelist. I'm a missionary, but I'm not an evangelist. Yet I'm called to evangelize. I'm called to share Jesus wherever I am, right? And that means friendships. That means listening to people. That means having people who are different than me and still showing them Jesus Christ. May the Lord help us. So, like I said, it's a can of worms we're opening. It's a lot of questions, but may the Lord help us to answer it in our own families, relationships, and circumstances. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for your word. Thank you for Jesus Christ, that he wasn't a politician. He wasn't a salesman. He lived what he preached. His compassion was real. His love was genuine. His heart was pure. Father, help us to emulate our Lord Jesus Christ in a world that is so dark. And we fear for many parents, for their kids, and that's real. We fear for what's going to happen, what's coming down the road, yet we also know that we want to live out your light and your grace to a world that is ever more broken, and bring healing. Help us, Father, to be Daniels in this time, to not give up, to not give in, to keep trusting you and helping us to build bridges and have empathy. Lord, whatever it means in our circumstance, that you would touch us, and that whatever I've said today that brings good would stay, and whatever is not, that would be put aside. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this. In Jesus' name, amen.